Hi everyone. I'm using headphones here today. I'm at a beautiful place. I think maybe I can show you here, but um, in Sedona. But there's also a quite busy road nearby, and so I'm hoping that the traffic noise will not be too great for this video to be audible by you easily. Um, and I'm sort of, I guess, in a way, responding. Hopefully, responding, not reacting to your, posts that I read through last week, and it's clear to me that the whole subject that we're involved in here, which is the origin and destiny of human consciousness, obviously, is fraught with difficulty on a kind of, I suppose, it's at like a philosophical level. And I want to try and, if possible, simply call out what these philosophical difficulties are. And I do think that it is worth our while to wrestle with philosophical issues. And it's, for some of us, it's also fun. But ultimately, that will be not productive for us. Well, not in the long run, anyway. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we should not let ourselves get caught up on these philosophical issues. We should move on forward and sort of see what happens without sort of, which is the entire subject of philosophy for the last 2,000 years. Seems to me to have got itself caught up in particular issues, like do we have free will and things like that they've never been able to answer, and so they just go round and round and round with different arguments, equally able to argue for one side or the other, not coming to a conclusion, and that is perhaps ultimately not productive, you know. Although it's kept a lot of people busy for a lot of years. So, but we can't ignore these things, and so we have some significant issues, and one of them is this issue of what is consciousness, and how are we to think about it. This is a very weird thing to do, because presumably it's consciousness that's doing the thinking, right? How are we to think about it? But in that process, it's actually consciousness that's doing the thinking. It's a little bit like trying to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, which we know can't be done. So it's like we're seeing through consciousness, being aware through consciousness, right? And everywhere we turn, that's true. We see through consciousness, and so, is it possible to see that the way that we see? Well, maybe, but typically we require ourselves to be able to sort of step outside of something to look back on it in order to really talk about what it is. Well, we can't do that. We can't step outside of our consciousness, right? We can't do it. We're in it, and so we can't step outside of it. So we're irrevocably involved in consciousness all the time, even when we're thinking about consciousness. So this makes it a very difficult subject to think about. And when we do think about consciousness as a thing, then we run into trouble. What kind of thing is consciousness? Is it a kind of substratum that underlies everything? Is it a causal factor that existed before the universe? That in other words, like Niels Bohr said, that consciousness is primary. It comes before matter. Are we to think that way? And if so, do we think of consciousness as being equatable with God, for example? And I'm not sure what your beliefs are in that respect, but is consciousness equatable with God? and if so, if it is, then that raises a whole other bunch of questions, such as how can our consciousness then have an origin and a destiny if we can equate it with God? How could that be? Does God evolve? Does God have an origin? So it sort of calls into question, everything that we're sort of focused on here, depending on how we think about consciousness. And one of the things that I want to point out here, and we're in the midst of Ken Wilber, and many of you rightly respond and criticize the Wilberian model. It's definitely open to criticism, in my view. But there are some sort of beautiful things that come through. Now, I don't really want to make this video about the pre-trans fallacy. We can certainly talk about that later. In fact, we should. The pre-trans fallacy may be wrong, okay, and but again, as we've sort of said, it has at least stimulated the inquiry, the discussion. It was extremely a brilliant kind of idea, proposal that has to generate a response. One of the things that I think is a great contribution from Ken Wilber is the idea of a developmental stage beyond the rational, which Piaget goes up to basically to the rational, and Wilber brings in this stage that I'm not sure what he's calling it these days, but originally it was called vision logic. And in vision logic, so in the rational stage, one has the ability to put oneself in the shoes of another. So it's like to see from their point of view, because you can rationally think yourself into their position. And you're like, well, if I was in their position, then I would kind of feel like this, and you can do that. So you can see the other point of view. Nevertheless, in the rational stage, you believe still that there is a right point of view still, that there is a right way to look at things, and a misguided way or a wrong way. But you have this ability to move your perspective using the rational mind. Okay, so that's one of the characteristics of the rational. But when you move above the rational to vision logic, then you move into this ability where you actually know, you don't really think any longer that there is a right view. So you have the ability to take, see, hold different perspectives without privileging any one of them. It's called aperspectival. You have the ability to take an aperspectival view. In other words, I can admit to myself there are many possible views, there are many possible truths. Now, in given contexts, certain truths will be more valid than others. So you're not saying that in a certain context that this view isn't a better view, but in general, you hold any view that has the potential of truth in it. You have the ability to hold it, even views that completely contradict one another. Okay, you have the ability to hold contradictory views as being true, both being true. Now, the rational mind can't do that, because how could that be? How could both things be true? It can't figure it out. Okay, and here's the thing. And I actually think that's a brilliant contribution. It's been extremely useful in my life. I have practiced that. And I practice that in these courses as much as I possibly can. And I'm suggesting that we do. So these ideas are going to come at us. And can we say to ourselves, you know what? That one could be true. I'll hold that as, and not only that, I'm going to say it is true. And then that one completely contradicts this one, but that one's also true. If you can do that, it propels you to the next level. It's part of this raising of consciousness itself. Okay, so I advocate it. So let's see if we can be practitioners of vision logic. Okay. Now, as a general principle, and another thing that Wilbur says, and so he has these brilliant ideas, is that, you know, we've all been criticizing the hierarchical model, right? So it's like it's hierarchical, it's rigid, it's a problem. Yes, but it's also not wrong. It's not wrong. So because hierarchies exist, okay, so it may be done in a too rigid a way, or a misguided way, or maybe it could be done better, more flexibility, more non-linearity built into it. Actually, ultimately the model is highly non-linear, but but nevertheless, we've got it. Here he is. Here we are. We have this hierarchical model, and let's say that there's some kind of truth in there somewhere, of some kind. Okay, so what Wilbur has said, and this is going back a ways into I forget which book it was. I'll try and remember. But if we're at a certain level of consciousness, and we look upward, right? So looking not physically upward, but metaphorically upward. So towards higher levels, what happens is we are confronted with paradox. So the principle being that at one level, looking upward, basically, because this level can't encompass truths of a higher level, looking upward produces the state of paradox, right? So one encounters paradox, and this is one, right? That this is true and that's true, or there are hierarchies and there aren't hierarchies, or hierarchies are useful and hierarchies aren't useful, or this kind of thing. We're gonna that consciousness may evolve, but consciousness is responsible for everything. How could that be? We're going to, as looking up, we're going to encounter paradox, and I want to suggest that this may be a part of the issue with encountering all these philosophical problems that we have in this course, is that from a typical level of consciousness, if we are dealing with things, entities that are really belong in higher levels, then we're going to encounter all kind of philosophical problems and paradoxes, right? And the way to work with those is with vision logic. So paradox actually is a practice. Paradox is a way forward. So we should not be expecting to sort of see the path, you know, and it makes sense to us and to follow it. We should be expecting to see conflict and confusion and paradox. And then what we do is we use the paradox as the way forward. It's because the paradox is right. There's a kind of truth in paradox, right? And so what we do is we let that paradox work on us, and it propels our consciousness. It helps propel. It's the portal. Paradox is the portal, right? So we should not be expecting things to make sense, particularly in this course. In general, in life, we shouldn't expect things to make sense, but particularly in this course where we're dealing with the subject of consciousness, we should not expect to have things to make sense, that one thing to be obviously true and one thing not. We're in the business of paradox. We're in the business of vision logic. We're going to have vastly different stories, and what we need to do is say, you know what? There's truth in all of them, and they're all in a certain way true. And then we'll see where that takes us. We'll see what level of consciousness that can take us to. And so this is what I'm suggesting in terms of moving forward with the philosophical issues that we're encountering. Not that we shouldn't wrestle with them, not that we shouldn't get into that paradox and say, well, you know, there's this view and there's that view, and I think I was going to say, you know, one of the aspects of this course is it's like, this is a course where we get to kind of play with ideas in a way. I mean, because you're being presented with a few, but hey, there's other possibilities too we can come up with, right? For the evolution, the origin and destiny of consciousness. So I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't play, but I'm suggesting that we should remember that ultimately paradox is the way forward. That we're not in the business of finding a truth or an answer. This is the right way, this is the wrong way. We're in the business of holding all these ideas, being bigger than all of these ideas, and letting them work on us, and then seeing where that takes us. Because what will happen in this process potentially is insight. When you hold vastly different ideas, if you can hold them, just hold them, and you can get bigger than them. Well, in my experience, what happens is you may open yourself to kind of vast insight that will just pop in, where you suddenly see the bigger picture, the whole picture that can hold all of these things. And that has propelled you forward in your consciousness to another level. Something is going on here. So I want to send you a paper, not a paper, it's just one sheet from Ken Wilber in the beginning of his big book, Sex, Ecology, and Spirituality. And essentially he's like, hey, you know what, guys, look around. Something's going on here. And that's what we're talking about in this course, really. Something's going on here. You know, we've got, science produces this big picture of evolution. It's like there's all this stuff. There's ourselves, there's mystery everywhere you look and everything. But yet something is clearly going on. It's like, let's take a shot at what that thing is. But not expect to grasp it, except via this process of expanded consciousness. Because if we settle within our minds, we'll be stuck at that level. Okay, you probably couldn't hear any of this because of traffic, probably just as well. Anyway, I hope this was useful, and I'll be talking to you soon. Okay, bye.